Esther.
Yeah.
And we're in Esther 3. We've seen the problem, Queen Vashti and her defiance of Xerxes. We've seen King Xerxes take advice from apparently some very wise people. At least he labels them as wise, and disposes of her, and then goes about raising up a new wife, Esther, through a very elaborate process. And so Esther is queen. And now, at the very end of chapter 2, it's kind of interesting the way this thing moves along, almost as if just giving you the bare bones of the story, because you get Esther's queen, and then right at the very end of chapter 2, what do you get? Mordecai uncovers a plot that would possibly cause King Xerxes to be put to death. It comes out to be true, and then right away we actually then now get to meet this villain, if you want to call him that. But this guy who is actually going to be now really kind of the center of the story as we work our way through, because it's him who is Haman, who is looking to destroy the Jews. And the introduction question is this: since there are some that are at one table by themselves, you can talk to each other if you want, or you could just say nothing. It's okay. Discuss with your table an incident that you know from history where someone's anger got the best of them. What was the result of their anger? And actually, we can just, since there's a smaller number, we can just do that together. We can just pretend we're all at one big table. And that big table is it's not like these, because those tables are not good for Bible study. It's a giant circle table.
If you don't have to wrestle with the leg.
I don't know, because it's Christmas, I think of Herod. I think he had a lot of anger towards the Messiah.
Yeah, absolutely. What was his outcome? What was the outcome of his anger?
Killing a bunch of kids.
Killing a bunch of people, yeah.
And that's usually what happens.
We'll talk more about that later, but yeah, absolutely.
I think of Hitler.
Excellent. Yeah. There's a guy who seemingly was consumed by anger for one group of people. In all honesty, you start to read this, you're like, maybe these guys had more in common than we maybe want to admit.
Yeah, disabled people too, but it was a lot of Jews.
Yeah. Anything else? Anybody personally know? You don't have to share stories, but anybody personally know someone who gets really, really angry, and what does that do? Maybe it puts them in a difficult situation.
Drives people away.
Maybe finds themselves lined up in prison or jail because they don't know how to control their anger. Right? It's a problem. And it's something that, we're going to see gets the better of the people in our lesson today. The only benefit that they have is that they're in power. They're in power. And so whatever they want to do, they can do. And if we've got time, which we probably won't, but if we do, I might have you guys go through and just look at some of the little details that talk about King Xerxes as we work through it, because it's kind of interesting to see this kind of connection that we have between Haman and Xerxes and this thing called anger. All right. Now, we're going to jump in reading the first 6 verses, which kind of lays out the issue that's at hand. All right. So after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman. When you read it, you might expect it to say Mordecai, right? Because you get the event that we just saw was Mordecai uncovering the king's plot, and so you're like, oh, maybe. When I remember the first time I read it, I was like reading along. I was like, honored Haman, and I was like, should that be Mordecai? But we're at a different part now. We're a different part of the story. So after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He promoted him and placed him over all the officials who served with him. All the servants of the king who were at the king's gate were bowing down and kneeling in Haman's presence, because the king had commanded that this be done for him. But Mordecai did not bow down and did not kneel. So the servants of the king who were at the king's gate, said to Mordecai, "Why are you going against the king's command?" And even though they spoke to him every day, he did not listen to them. They reported this to Haman to see whether Mordecai's actions would be tolerated. Mordecai had informed them that he was a Jew. Now when Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down and kneeling in his presence, Haman was enraged. Because the king's servants had made Haman aware of Mordecai's nationality, Haman was not satisfied with laying hands only on Mordecai. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Now, question is, notice this new character, Haman, who's now in our account. What can we say about him? What does the text make known to us? I'm going to go down.
He didn't like Jews.
Yeah, he didn't like Jews. That's very clear. In fact, I think if you read the NIV, it says something like he was scorned with just destroying Mordecai. Like that wasn't a good option for him. Yes, Mordecai was the only one doing this, but in his mind, it can't just be him. It's got to be more. It's got to be all. According to what we have in the text, it says, what about him? That he is an Agagite. Now, there are some that suggest this is just a coincidence, and actually I can't really make any of those connections for you, but this is not the first time that we see an Agagite in the Old Testament. In fact, if you look at these passages from Deuteronomy and 1 Samuel, what you're going to see is the Amalekites are underneath the king Agag, which probably is where this might come from. It could come from. It might be just that it's a coincidence that he's from a region that is very similar to this group of people who have been enemies of the Jews ever since they left Egypt. But look at what it said. Look at what Scripture says about this group of people. So if you go to Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 25, 17. All right. Remember the Amalekites without any fear of God. That's how you describe them. They have no fear of God. Did to you on the journey after you came out of Egypt. Remember how they confronted you on the way, and when you were weak and tired, they cut off all the stragglers among you, the ones who were lagging behind. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all your enemies that are around you in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, wipe away the memory of Amalek from under the heavens. Do not forget. Okay, so that's what the Lord tells the Israelites, because these people were like chasing after them, killing the stragglers, just harassing them as they were passing through. Then you go to 1 Samuel, which is where you get this instance where, do you remember what Saul was asked by the Lord?
To kill the Amalekites.
If you start right there, the title is Saul's rejected, and why is it that he's rejected? Because he didn't do exactly what the Lord said. Now if you keep going down, let's see if I can. Here it is. So Saul struck the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which bordered Egypt. He took, there it is, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. And he devoted all the people to destruction with the edge of the sword. Right? So, but Saul and the people spared Agag and the best sheep. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing, I think, that here in Esther you have someone who claims to be an Agagite. Now, again, I can't say that it's, that this is one of those people who are left over. But it is kind of interesting that they use this term, and this is the history between these people and the Israelites. Yes?
Does Hamadatha appear anyplace else other than here on this page?
Not that I know of. It is kind of an interesting thing, though, that this is Haman, who claims to be an Agite, which, people do. They tie it back to this. One from Agag, the king of Amalek. Which is interesting because that's how Saul was disposed, because what did he not do? He did not kill all of them the way the Lord told him, and now what's the reverse role?
Comes back to bite.
Now, the Jews are underneath the same type of order from, we haven't got there, but it's going to be underneath the same type of order that comes from this guy named Haman. Just kind of an interesting thing. All right, we'll go back to Esther. All right. Many questions are raised by the situation that is in these verses. The notion that, this is kind of a weird thing. When you first read it, what's your thoughts about Mordecai? What do you think?
How come he's here at this time?
How come he's here at this time? In my mind, when I look at all this stuff and they're asking them to bow down, you could go one of two ways, couldn't you? You could say, well, why not? Right? You could say, why not? Because it's in reality, if you look at these passages that I've got up on the board, Genesis 23, Genesis 33, and 1 Samuel 24, guess what you're going to see? You're going to see Jewish people bowing down to royalty.
And we do that now.
Yeah, just as a form of honor and respect. And I think it's kind of interesting. I was trying to see it. The EHV is different than the NIV that I am studying it in, but it is kind of interesting, the notion, I think it's in the NIV, and I didn't catch it in here, but it talks about, Mordecai doesn't bow down, actually, he wasn't giving Haman the honor of bowing down, right?
To pay him honor, it said.
Yeah, to pay him honor, which I think is an interesting addition that the NIV has. As you're going to read through this, there are certain sections, especially when we look at these things, that there's different ways that you could translate it, especially since we don't have the inflection or the tone in which the words were said, and we'll get to that as we move later on. And Haman says to King Xerxes, King Xerxes says to Haman, hey, the money is yours. That could mean don't give me any money, just do what you want, or it could mean it's your money anyway, so if you want to give it to me for doing that, that's totally fine. Totally fine. But I don't know. When I first read it, I'm like, why wouldn't you show honor, right? I fall back to that passage in Romans, right? To those who have honor, give honor. Those who are due respect, respect, right? And yet, what do we see? We don't see that. So you look at these passages from Genesis. Like you go to Genesis 23, you're going to find Abraham. 23, verse 7. I think that's right. Yep. Abraham stood up and bowed down to the people of the land. That is to the descendants of Heth. Right? So these are foreign people. He's showing them respect. And then you go to Genesis 33.
But isn't he also asking something of them?
Yes, but either way, the notion would be, what's the act? What's the act in question? It's bowing down to pay homage. So the notion would be is, if Mordecai says, I can't bow down, that doesn't actually seem to track with Old Testament. Now, you're catching on to something that we don't have, which is more information. It's very possible the other two passages, Daniel 3, Daniel 6, what do they not do?
They don't know about that.
They don't bend a knee. Please.
Yeah, well, I don't know, maybe you're going to come to that, so I don't want to just jump in, but I read that Cressman commentary on this, and he said that some of the differences now are those things that they were honoring, whereas the idea that he had was that this was like royalty and like they were considered godlike in their country, and so it's sort of like in that respect they were asking Mordecai to bow down because they were godlike. Something we don't necessarily can't tell in here, but that was his comment.
Well, and so and really, as you look through all this, the whole point is that we don't have a ton of information on this. what we really have is just the things that took place. We don't have motivation. We don't have any type of other thing, like the notion that, because even you get to the point where I have it. Is it the next question? It's the next question, right? How does the way the officials deal with Haman inform us about the situation, right? They what do when they're dealing with Mordecai? What do?
Well, they first of all go to him and say, you should be bowing down. They give him maybe the
Right.
benefit of the doubt, but when he doesn't do it, then they go and tattle on him.
Right, and in this regard too, when you're reading through it, it says that they talk to him every day. Where's it at?
Yeah, number 4.
Right here. They spoke to him every day. So every day this was a thing, Hey, you should probably bow down and pay respects. Now we don't know what's behind it, right? If you look at Daniel chapter 3, Daniel 6, which one is underneath the aspect of the Persians, which would be in the same realm of government. Daniel 3 is not, right? That's the 3 men in the fiery furnace. That's underneath King Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel 6 is underneath Darius, which is a Persian, right? And what they had asked of Daniel, which, Daniel wasn't going to do, but that they would pray to no one else besides the king, right? So if
What country was Nebuchadnezzar from?
Nebuchadnezzar was a Babylonian,
Babylon.
which is right before the Persians. And so if it is in that line, then we would say, of course, Mordecai's not going to bow down. Because then what do you have? You have this notion that this is encouraging those people, or at least acknowledging to everybody else that Haman and Xerxes are God, right? And so we don't have any of that information. We're going to put the best construction on it and assume that's the case. We're going to assume that Mordecai, at least when I read it, that's what I do, right? I'm not going to assume that Mordecai is this guy who's just, he doesn't like Haman for some reason, and so he's not bowing down to him because he doesn't want to give him respect, because he might need to give him respect, or because maybe he beat him out for a position. Right? We know Mordecai's one of the officials. Maybe he had some dealings with Haman, and he can't bow down to him.
But what made it more showy is because the king's servants had made Haman aware of Mordecai's nationality, where he didn't know that before.
Yeah. So and you read that the verse 4. What does it say? Mordecai had informed them that he was a Jew. So in this regard, it's very possible that this might actually be the case. That Mordecai is saying, I can't bow down to anybody besides God. You go to Exodus, you look at Exodus 20 where they're doing the where God gives the people the 10 Commandments. That's the first one, right? That's a biggie. You can't do that. And so I don't know if for some reason or another Haman does not like the Jews. And maybe it's because it's not just Mordecai who's not doing it, but other Jews as well. Now, we don't really know if that's the case or not. But when we get to the point, when we move into our next section, what we're going to see is that when Haman goes to Xerxes and starts to talk to him about getting rid of, exterminating these Jews, he gives them reasons. And we'll talk about why or what those reasons are. And it is kind of just an interesting thing to see the reasons that he gives and to see the reasons that he doesn't include. And you might find yourself going, he might just hate the Jews. He might just hate the Jews because of who they are, because their religion doesn't allow them to do the things that he wants, which is to honor and glorify him. I don't know.
That gives a couple of reasons in why he told Esther to not tell anyone he was a Jew.
Right.
Because first of all, if she's being some concubine or some whatever to the king, that doesn't say much for her religion.
Yeah.
And
You're 100%.
also the safety of not telling anybody.
Well, yeah. So, and then I wonder in that sense if Mordecai, going back to chapter 2, if he's saying don't do this, don't tell anybody, because it might put you in a situation where you could lose your life, especially when you look at instances that we've seen before, or you get Daniel brought into the equation, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or even Daniel himself, right? It might have been a notion of saying, don't tell people. Be a Jew, but don't tell people. Like, you don't have to go around telling everyone. Kind of hide that a little bit, because it might end up that that means your life, type of a thing. Which then asks the question. That happens often in places where there is persecution, where they're asked specifically. It's happened in this country. Are you a Christian? And then what do you respond? If you say yes, that might mean death. And then the question is what do you do? Right? You've got passages in the New Testament that talk about, right? If you deny Jesus, he deny you, right? So that's why I said, like, this is such an interesting situation that we see Esther and Mordecai in, because we would tell people, at least I would instruct them, God can protect you. Even in situations like that, what did Daniel? What do we see from the book of Daniel?
Yeah.
Those men said, "We are servants of the Lord. If this means death, fine. God can save us. If He doesn't, no, we're not going to." So I think in that sense, maybe you'd have maybe encouragement one way. Now, obviously, I don't know that. I mean, obviously they're not standing in front of a king. Maybe when someone asks them that question, but. It is just kind of this interesting situation to where you see Esther and Mordecai behaving in such a way as to say, this is questionable. Which is why, as we said at the beginning, there is some doubt as to whether or not, this should be where it is. Some people are not so for certain that, hey, this book should be in the Bible. It is an antilegomena book, which I think we've talked about before. It means it's spoken against. Yes?
I have a question about, because in the study Bible that I have, it shows that Ezra, in chronologically,
Yep.
half of Ezra happened.
As before.
Then Esther,
Yep.
and then another Ezra. So
Mhm.
maybe it actually was like all Ezra, and this got pulled out as a
What do you mean, all Ezra?
reference. I mean, maybe because there's obviously speaking of God's word and.
Oh, I see.
Ezra
You're saying
and-
that Esther should find itself in the middle of the book of Ezra. The only issue that I'd have with that is Ezra is the writer of Ezra, and if he wanted the book of Esther to be in the middle, I would think there'd be some kind of evidence of that. I don't know if there is, to be honest. That would be something I'd want to look at and look into more, because Ezra is, as far as I can remember, he's the one attributed to accumulating the writings of the Old Testament and putting them kind of in what we have today. Obviously, ordered differently for the Jews than for us, but he's the guy. And so I think in that sense, if Esther were to fall in the middle of Ezra, and this was Ezra writing, then I think in this regard, Ezra would have put it there. You know what I mean?
Wouldn't have made it a separate book.
Yeah. In my mind, I don't know. You're 100% correct. Chronologically, you have the first, I think it's five chapters of Ezra. Maybe it's more.
1 to 6.
1 to 6. 1 to 6. And then 7 to the end is 17 is after. 100%. Time-wise, you're doing that. And I actually took out that timeline in my PowerPoint, but I wish I would have left it, because I actually think it does. I think it does comment on those, like some going off, being deported, or Ezra leaving and going back. But you are 100% correct. Esther is in the middle, should be nestled in the middle of, chronologically, in the middle of Ezra.
Esther. It says it's suspended. Then there's Esther, and then.
Yep. That is correct. Chronologically, Ezra is broken right in the middle. It's before they go, and then after they go, and Esther's right in the middle, chronologically. Were we here? We were here. We've already talked about this. I don't know. Is any questions so far? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, didn't the Lord use Mordecai's mind or actions to do what he wanted done?
Yeah, 100%. I think takeaway for this, the last question is like a application to your life type of a thing. And any way you look at this situation, what you can see, especially as you look at it, and it's a devastating account altogether, you're going to see all these things, just they all work together. And you seemingly think, I don't know how they do, but they do. And the reason is because God is obviously working. He is working here. So, yeah, using Mordecai in this way. Or even, using Esther in the way that she's being used. Which is kind of interesting because this event that we're looking at, or we're getting ready to talk about, is removed from what we just read by, I think, 5 years. We'll look at the timelines in the text itself. So there's I believe it is 5 years, I think. It's not one right after the other. You're getting just the kind of the tidbits of this and the build up to it. If there's no other questions, let's jump into this part where we're reading 7 through 15, which is the rest of the chapter. So here it says, during the 12th year, Esther was queen. I guess I should wait. Maybe you'll find that later. During the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, during the first month, the month of Nisan, a pur, which is where Purim comes from, which means a lot, was cast before Haman for every day of the month of the year until Adar, the 12th month, was chosen. Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a group of people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all the other people. They do not keep the laws of the king. It is not good for the king to allow them to get away with this. If the king agrees, a directive should be written to destroy them. I will weigh about 10,000 talents of silver to the treasury of the king for those who carry out this work. The king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the man opposing the Jews. The king said to Haman, the silver will be given to you, as well as the people. Do with them whatever seems good to you. In the first month of the 13th day, the king's scribes were summoned. A decree based on everything Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps, to the governors over each province, and the city officials of every people. The decree was sent to each province in its own writing system, and to each people in its own language. And it was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the king's signet ring. The letters were sent by courier to all the provinces of the king to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, including children and women, and to plunder their goods in one day, on the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. A copy of the decree was to be proclaimed as a law to all the peoples in every province so that they could be ready for the day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the word of the king. The law was issued in Susa, the citadel. The king and Haman sat down to drink. The city of Susa was perplexed and confused. All right. So there you have Haman's response to this act of disrespect from Mordecai. This is here. There's a lot of reference to time in this section, and what can we say about the way this was all carried out? Esther 2:16 is a reference to in the 7th year of the reign of King Xerxes. That's when Esther becomes queen, right? So if it's in the 7th year when she's queen, and now it's the 12th year, how long has she been queen? 5 years. 5 years. Which I think is kind of a remarkable amount of time, because as you watch her and you see her kind of interact with King Xerxes, it just doesn't seem like there's a good amount of like understanding between one another. like, like, I'm afraid to go before the king. So you know that he's angry, or can be angry, and that he can just kind of get rid of you. But it's not like she has some kind of, I mean, she has a special place because she's queen, but it's not like, well, okay, I'll go talk to him. It's not that. It's straight up like, I'm kind of concerned. This is a difficult situation. If obviously none of us are kings or queens, but if your wife or your husband had an issue, you just go talk to them. Not so in this case, right? Which kind of shows us, I think the separation that they had between one another. Okay, and what's really interesting, along with this question, I thought would be fun to talk about is when does the event take place that where Haman is like, yeah, we're gonna annihilate these Jews? What month does it take place? Did you guys catch it?
To Beth?
It takes place in what month?
Nisan.
Yeah, the month of Nisan, the first month, right? And then, when does the lot fall for the Jews to be exterminated or annihilated? The 12th month.
12th month.
Man, that's a long time. And you think about being a Jew living in that underneath that reign. I mean, obviously it would have taken time for these decrees to reach out. I read a commentary that suggested 90 days for the decree to get from there to the far stretches of, the kingdom, the Persian kingdom. But you think about that. That means, if it really is, 12 months in the aspect of about what we think 12 months to be, 3 months of that is, the word getting out. The remaining half a year, they're living underneath what?
Fear.
A decree that you're going to die on this day during this month. Yes?
Since they followed the lunar calendar, did they have 13 months?
So, I don't know specifically the amount of months that they have, but I know that they have months that they would run twice to make up for, a difference in because if you have only a set number of months, I think it's
Months or days?
well, so obviously when we follow a month, we follow a set number of days because it kind of keeps the seasons at the same time each year. If you're following a lunar calendar, right, if you had let's say 10 months, you might find it to where you're planting in 1 month, and if you live long enough, that month is like your winter season where you can't plant at all. And so what they did is when they got too far out of whack, they would include another month. I think there's technically, I want to say 2 months where they could add in 2 months. I'll have to look more into that, but I do know that their months are obviously not the same as our months because it's following the moon. So every time there's a new moon, which is shorter, and that would mean then in order for them to kind of keep themselves on track, right, then sometimes they add another month, I think, or 2. I could be wrong, but I think it's 2. Which is why we celebrate Easter not on the same day, right? We don't celebrate Easter on the same day every year. That's because it follows the lunar calendar.
Beginning of the month, sometimes the end of the
Right,
month.
and that's because it's following the Jewish calendar for Passover.
After the first.
Yeah, and if you follow the Eastern Orthodox, like if we were in the Eastern Orthodox, it would even be a different date, because the way in which they reckon it is different as well. We follow the Jewish Passover pretty much most of the time. Okay, I don't know. Sorry, Debs, I can't give you more than that, but
They needed to move to Canada.
either way, the point of the question is there's a significant amount of time where they're living underneath a decree that, okay, just wait, because at this time you're going to be killed and your stuff's going to be taken.
Seems like World War II.
That's just kind of a crazy thing, right? Yeah. And then you look at when Haman says to the king, these are the reasons why you should get rid of these people. What does he say? So what 3 reasons did Haman give Xerxes as to why the Jews should be exterminated, and what reasons did he omit?
Their laws are different from those of all the other people.
Yep.
They do not keep the laws of the king,
Yep.
and it is not good for the king to allow them to get away with this.
Sure. I think in this regard, what doesn't he include? What doesn't he say about it?
He didn't like it.
Anything about
He doesn't say anything about who they are. It just says there's this certain group of people. I don't know about you, but if you're like a king who's concerned about his citizenry, a certain group of people maybe is not a very good definition for a group of people. Like, what are we talking about here, Haman? Well, it's just a certain group of people. Listen, they don't listen to you. They don't do the things
And
that
he
you
just
say.
believed him.
Well, right.
Didn't investigate.
Right, I think in that regard too, which is the next question on my sheet, is like, look at Xerxes' response to this. It's not like, well, let me investigate this further, Haman, and make sure that there isn't this group of people, or there is. He just is like, yeah, whatever. I don't really care. Please.
Well, he promoted him, high official, so he probably just figured he knows what he's doing.
Well, I think most certainly you have that. I also think you get that too because of what happens at the very end. After they make this decree and it's all kind of finalized, what do they go do?
Hanging.
Hey, let's go grab a drink. Let's go work this over. You know, at the very. I mean, it's kind of just nuts. The king and Haman sat down to drink. Business as normal, I guess. That is kind of an amazing thing to me, at least, which in my mind causes you to ask the question, like, or at least I think worth pausing on and saying, Xerxes, king. Obviously, Haman must have been his buddy, because he's like, whatever, you do whatever you want.
Drinking buddy.
Yeah.
I think that last line though, that Haman is pointing out to him, you know, it's not good for you to let this happen. You know, that
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
that's almost like the big clincher right there.
In this regard, in the cases that we've looked at, in the sense of in Daniel, where you see this kind of like laws being put into play. Like if you're reading Old Testament, this sounds very familiar to things that were taking place during the book of Daniel, right? People putting laws in order where the Jews are getting in trouble. And I think, at least for me, one of the things that stands out the most in Daniel is especially Daniel chapter 6, is what do you have? It almost seems uncharacteristic of, I believe it's Darius in chapter 6, where he is what?
He's putting extra laws in place.
Well, he's putting extra laws in place, but he is hoping that Daniel survives. Because he recognizes this guy is good for me. Like, okay, maybe he's not willing to go with all the laws that he has, but his heart is beating for my kingdom. Like, he's legitimately working and advancing and doing things that are good as a whole. And I kind of wonder in this regard, in all honesty, I don't see Xerxes as a guy who's like kind of like really in control of everything. I see him as a guy who's like, officials do whatever you want, but don't cross me. Because if you do, you'll find out why I'm king. And I think in this sense, like, those, I don't know if it, I mean, like, so the notion that this is not good for your kingdom, or, I mean, like, I wonder how big of an uprising they could have as a group of Jews. I wonder, like, what kind of an uprising that type of a group of people could have against the Persian kingdom.
Well, I guess the intent that I thought was not so much going down that way, but it's like, these guys are thumbing you. Are you sure you want to let them mock you?
It's a stroking the ego.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, rather than thinking that these Jews.
Well, no.
It was,
I think our points are one and the same. Mine is like, this isn't really a valid point of him saying, oh yeah, these people, I tell you, they're really something to watch out for. You know, this isn't good for you to let this take place. Of course, Haman is saying, listen, king, I'm looking out for your best interest here, and these people, they need to go, because they are not listening to you. And you're king, and you are the king. You know, like, you can kind of get that.
If
And
you don't set an example, then you're gonna look like a fool.
yeah, and anything to play into King Xerxes' ego, I think probably worked pretty well for him. I think so. Right, so much so that he was willing to dispose of his queen, who was the mother of the next heir. Right? I mean, it's just craziness. Debs.
I had just a slightly different list of 3 above. I forgot to say this. So the first thing that he introduced was the fact that this group of people was scattered throughout the provinces.
Yep.
We got a problem here, King. They're all over the place.
Sure.
And then the second one I had was that they have different laws, so they don't keep the laws of the king. And then the same, not good for the king to allow them. I think he sort of snuck it in there. They're all over the place.
Yeah. I think in this regard, what you see Hammond doing is he wants this to take place, and so any way that he can get that done, he's going to do it. Even if that means, and this is what I was insinuating, even if he's lying about, the way this is happening. Even if it's like, well, I don't really care, where they are and what they're going to do, because I don't think they're a big group that's going to even cause them any problems, but I really want them all dead. And so, King, you cannot let this type of behavior stand, because you're king, and it looks bad on you. So, and I think this notion of Xerxes' response to this is, I don't really know how else to describe it as, but like extremely just cold, and almost like, there's not even a notion of how big is this group of people. Like, what are we talking here? What's the real events that's going to take place if we are going to get rid of these people, which means kill them? It's just, you do whatever you want. The passage that I have there is from the Sermon on the Mount, and it's Jesus teaching about the 5th commandment. Which is kind of an amazing thing. Sinful anger is the way that EHV labels it. You have heard that it was said that people long ago, you should not murder, and whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that everyone who is angry with his brother without a cause will be subject to judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, will have to answer to the Sanhedrin. But whoever says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. In this regard, Jesus is saying you shouldn't have anger towards people. And I think in this sense, obviously, what do we see Hammond filled with? Anger and rage. I put this underneath King Xerxes because, like, the 5th commandment is you should value life. And actually, when you look at King Xerxes, there's really not a lot. There's not a lot of, like, substance in the aspect of saying this guy really cares about people.
It's all about him.
Right, which then leads us back to the very thing in which Mordecai had a problem with, right? Xerxes has made himself out to be his own god. And Kretzmann's not wrong in saying that this is very much worked up into the mindset and the ideology of. You can see that from Daniel too, right? You're going to pray to no one else besides the king. That's what Daniel's told. Not going to live that way. You're going to bow down to the king because he is the king, and he is godlike, and whatever you have comes from him. No, thank you. I will not do that. But you can just see the more you read about Xerxes, at least in my mind, and even now Haman, you get such disdain not only for people, but for God as well. And I think that most certainly is very visible as you read through this. Men who do not care about the Lord at all, or God at all, just themselves. Any questions or comments on that? All right, so question number 8 is, this type of edict seems so alarming that some suggest it's fake. This is I have read some commentaries that suggest this is such a crazy thing that people would that many people would be killed on one day doesn't make any sense. However, I think a simple glance at God's word and history can easily reveal that this is not an unusual thing, an unusual edict. What examples can you think of from Scripture and history that would bear this out?
Herod and Pharaoh.
Herod and Pharaoh, absolutely right. Both of them said, hey, kill these people. Now, it didn't take place on a single day. You might say that's a little different, but in this regard, the decree is issued. These people should be dead.
Nero.
100%. Nero, excellent.
Hitler?
Excellent. Right? These are people who have rightfully said, we're just going to exterminate people.
It isn't, I don't think it's written so much, but there's, like in the Chinese history, they got rid of whole groups of people.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yep.
Oh, and in our timeline, the edict to have, what was it, 1 or 2 children?
Yeah.
And so they slaughtered all the girl babies because the boy babies, now they got problems.
Yeah, because they
There's
would
not
carry
enough
them.
women.
Yeah, yeah. I think in this regard, right, I think what you can easily see is, maybe at face value you might say this is ridiculous.
It's not.
But you would say, it's really not.
It's happened over and
It
over
really
again.
seems to kind of just be on par with everything that we know from...
It is ridiculous, but it's happened time and time
right,
again.
Right,
Yeah, there
it's,
we go.
it's a sad reality, but it is still very much a reality. I think in that sense, like, it's just that, right, 100%, 100%. I didn't write a question about this, but I will ask it. What does Haman also include as he's trying to get the king to carry out this edict? What does he say? That I think underlines the fact that this is not really something that is beneficial for King Xerxes, but Haman just wants it to happen so badly that he's willing to make sure. Yeah, he's willing to pay for it.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like, if this was really good for the king, I don't think there's really any notion of like, here's money. I don't think you need that. If I'm looking out for the interest of the king, my case is, hey king, this is something that's really serious. It should be taken care of. Like, we really need to take care of this. But I think he's trying to sweeten the deal by saying, and listen, I'm willing to fund this campaign. Which is almost to say, this is really just something that I want personally done. And if you would oblige, I'd appreciate it. I really would. Yes?
I was curious as to how much 10,000 talents of silver was worth.
Yeah,
And I tried, the talent is not specifically defined, and the range, I came up with 23 to 750 billion dollars.
So I read a commentary that said that it would probably be up to half of the Persian Empire's income for a year.
Yeah.
Really?
That's
Yeah.
what the footnote is here.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
estimated to be more than half the annual income of the empire.
Empire, which is a lot.
My calculations were
Haman was
today's
wealthy.
value.
What's that?
Haman must have been wealthy.
Yeah, 100%. Well, if you're a leading official, which I think, yeah. And, I also, when I was reading through stuff, there's question in the aspect of why would he even do that? Why would you be willing to put up that much amount of money?
That's what I was gonna say, why would he?
I read some commentaries that suggested that he would regain most of that by killing and plundering all of the stuff of the Jews.
Sure.
Oh, kind of like our supply of money to the Ukraine coming back to the Congress people.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this sense, I think it's very clear to see that Haman's intentions are not good. And in this sense, you get this notion of, man, that's a lot of money, but there's even, I read one commentary that said that he probably would have made that maybe more if he really would have wiped out all of the Jews and taken all their stuff. Although I don't necessarily know exactly how, he would accumulate all of that money. He probably would have had some kind of ways. I can only imagine if, you get in good with Xerxes, that maybe you probably have a similar kind of temperament. As long as you remember that he's top dog, you probably get to do pretty much the same stuff as he does. because he probably finds that entertaining. So I think in this sense, that to me is quite a telling thing where you say, wow, okay, yeah, absolutely. All right, I can't remember where. Oh, last question. What God did in the lives of Mordecai, Esther, and Haman only served to create a terrible situation. Yet God was in control for good. Has God ever worked things out so that you were left with more problems than you had before? What happened? How might this account help your faith? I would say in this regard, you don't have to share them with us today unless you want to. You certainly can. But in this sense, I think it is helpful for us, at least, as we read Scripture to say, problems that we face today, we're not unique in the aspect that we have problems.
Yeah, right.
Oftentimes, all of our lives are riddled with different types of problems that God takes and He works them for our benefit. And I think it's helpful for us to have a question like this and think about, Esther and Mordecai to say, sometimes there's difficulties, but in the face of those difficulties, we do need to be reminded oftentimes that, hey, the Lord is still in control. The Lord is still in control. He will work things for our good because that's what He's promised us. And then remind ourselves, too, that what is good for me might not be what I think is best. Because I think those two things are very difficult for people to grab onto and understand. Right? What I think is best might not be best for me. What I think is best might actually be bad for me. I just don't have the foresight and the knowledge of what's going on in my life to really understand that it's bad for me. Right? I sometimes will talk about, people will say when God opens or closes one door, He opens another one. Sometimes He doesn't. Sometimes when God shuts a door, He wants you to stay right where you're at. Because sometimes when we're moving through life, we can forget Him. So sometimes God says, no, you just be still and know that I am God. Which is an important reminder as we go out and live in this world. It really is. Yes.
I am always reminded of Romans 8:28. And when we had our car accident, I had three thoughts. The first one was, Lord have mercy. The second one was the car flipped and rolled. And the next thought I had was Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to them that love Him, who are called according to His purpose. And the next thought was, get the kids out of the car, it might blow up. And there were only 3 kids in the car, and it was 4:30 in the morning. It was pitch dark out, and Adrian, we finally found her in the path of where the car had rolled, and we were life flighted to Phoenix Children's Hospital, and she was unconscious for 4 days, in Phoenix Children's for 12 days, and she has no recollection of that whatsoever. And it took a long time to play out, and from the time she was out of high school until 10 years about, she pretty much lived in poverty, and now she's successful with her business.
Yeah. Oh.
And we get thanks for that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not.
And sometimes people don't have that.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
In this life.
Even the notion of making it out of something like that, right? I think sometimes we like to measure our success based upon possessions, when actually sometimes success is actually time. Sometimes, because time is something you cannot buy and you cannot get back. So sometimes just getting more time with someone is a tremendous blessing. Really is. Anybody else? If not, I'm going to say a prayer and let you go. All right, let's pray. Gracious Father in heaven, as we live in this world, craziness all around. Sometimes even in our life there's craziness. But move us always to find great comfort and trust in you knowing that, yeah, you do work for the good of those who love you, have been called according to your purpose. Move us to trust your loving care, to find great joy and happiness in the fact that even though our physical life on this world might be riddled with difficulty and struggle and stress, that spiritually you have got us taken care of. That spiritually we are yours, and we only just are awaiting until we get to live with you forever, removed from all of the physical stuff that might plague us in this life. Move us to find great joy in that. Move us to want to share that joy with others. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I have a question that,
Yeah.
that Haggai, the
Go
guy
for it.
that was in charge of getting Esther
Yeah.
prepped.
Hey, Haggai.
Yeah,